people that Alex featured in the film, so it was a pleasure to see that and to hear about his mother. I did not know his mother, but I knew a number of the friends that were interviewed in this. So let's bring up the director of the film, who I think has done an incredible job, not only as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, but has the responsibility of projecting his mother on the big screen. Alex? I told Alex earlier when I met him in the lobby, because today was the first day that I met Alex, and I kind of felt like I knew him. I said, do you know what? Filmmakers have a job in themselves to do that, because I could never be a filmmaker, Alex. But then documentarians have another responsibility of facts and information and interviews and everything. And then you add to that trying to do a documentary about a mother. So tell me about creating this project and attempting to be, as I feel you did, objective about this project.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Great question. You know, I guess I've been making this film for 30 years because most of the video footage that you see, I shot, with the exception of the news segments. So I was, not the new interviews and stuff, those are directed, but a lot of that stuff that looks like videotape from the, from the 90s onward, I was there shooting that, and I was traveling with my mother, and I was, in her studio many days, just, shooting her paint, and I did a lot of interviews with her, so it's been a long, long process, but after, she passed, Amy Posick came to me, and producer Amy Posick came to myself and my brother Michael and said, hey, you guys did the short film about your mother for her celebration of life. I think that could be a feature film. And it was something that my partner Sammy and I had talked about. Could we do some kind of a feature documentary? But honestly, just the idea of making a documentary about somebody's life, especially somebody who lived a long, very busy, interesting life, and also my mother, just emotionally, logistically, just seemed like it was too much to take on. So it was really Amy saying, hey, I think the film festival might be interested in this, and people would come out to watch it, and then saying, oh, can you get this done in within a year? And Sammy and I ended up getting it done in maybe 4 or 5 months. So it was like we were making it for 30 years, but then we had like 4 or 5 months to actually put it together. So that part of the process was really fast. But it was kind of effortless, because with that sort of compressed time frame, you have to make very instinctual decisions, which is very much in the spirit of Nancy Noel. And so, some of the directorial choices, whether, they're made by me or, made by Sammy in his edit, they were things that were just very instinctual. And what you see here is something that was done, I wouldn't say hastily, but done on instinct. And in that way, I think it's very pure.
Craig, can you move to the light, please?
I'm sorry?
Can you move to the middle where the light's showing?
How's that?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Alex, you mentioned Amy, and you mentioned Sammy, and I know, and your brother's here. There's a number of people here in the audience today that have come a long distance, so kudos to you for being here. It's wonderful to have you as part of this. But as I've seen this film, and each time I watch it, I think, oh, here's another question that I think, my gosh, I didn't notice that the first time. But just, you were creating the personal insight of not only Nancy's work as an artist, but her love of the farm and the animals. But I just have to ask you the question, because I'm very familiar with the Amish community back there. And I know you did a great job of explaining that, but it gave the appearance in the film that it was rather easy, or her relationship of getting in the door to them was easier than it had to be difficult. So were there any things that she did that opened the door, that literally and figuratively, that that impressed me tremendously?
Yeah, so I would venture to say that Nancy is probably the foremost documentarian of Amish life in terms of paintings. Yeah, I don't know if there's another artist out there that's done as many paintings of the Amish, unless that artist, him or herself is Amish. But getting in with them, I think was kind of a slow process where she would go, she would show maybe some work she'd done, and they would maybe, say, okay, well, what do you want to do here? Kind of take a couple pictures of your child, and somebody who's gotten to know her a little bit would say, oh, okay, and we're going to paint a painting of her. And so as she just did painting after painting, she built up more of a trust with the community. There's a community up in Napanee, Indiana, Shipshewana, and I think just simply based upon the sort of reverence that she showed in those paintings for the community, for the beauty of their relationship with animals, the beauty of their quilts, and the simplicity of their life, which they're very proud of. I think they gave her that sort of backstage pass that they wouldn't give anybody else. And I remember Michael and I went there, as you saw some photos there, and they really opened up and really trusted us to take pictures, take video, and that was a rarity. So I don't think anybody else could have gotten that kind of access other than somebody they respected for respecting them.
I know you presented a lot of different pieces about Nancy's life, and it's like each piece of your documentary put another story behind Nancy's life. But during the development of this and all the different stories and audio and videos that you've done of your mother down through the years, were there any surprises? Did you learn anything as you started to put this documentary together? Were there any things that were surprises that you had not learned?
Well, I was very close to Mom, and Mom was very open. She talked to my brother and I about a lot of things in a very forward way. Her beliefs, her ideas are very much on the surface, and she would talk about them. So, there weren't real mysteries there. However, I guess I recommend, if you can do it, do a documentary about one of your parents. Because it is in itself an eye-opening, fascinating experience. Just the simple act of asking a question that maybe you haven't asked, but also you haven't asked in a kind of serious way that really deserves an answer, right? How often do you get to sit down with people who knew your parent and say, tell me about this or that. Tell me about the first time, or when you met her, or what was it like? What were the most important parts of your friendship? What did you respect most about her? And you're going to get answers that you've never heard before in normal conversation. So I think that was probably the most rewarding for me, and still rewarding when I sit there and watch the film, is I see other people talking about my mother in a very thoughtful way. And that just goes with the process. So the experience, the process was eye-opening for me, and full of its own little mysteries unraveled, because I just didn't know these little things that people felt and had experienced with my mother. So in a way, everything was interesting and new, yet nothing was entirely new, if that makes sense. It's just like you're seeing your parent through the point of view of a lot of different people, and so you're just getting this deeper, richer understanding of things you already knew about.
And I have to, maybe full disclosure here as to why this question comes up, because I happen to be very familiar with the camp that was referenced in the film, and the work that goes on at the camp, and the people that conduct everything at the camp. And there's reference to your mother's Catholic guilt. I'm wondering, those local Catholic churches in Indiana, what was the reception to her going in there and doing this? Because they had to have heard that they were painting nudes at the camp, right?
I cannot speak for the clergy in the Indianapolis community. My mother's relationship with Catholicism was fraught. If you noticed in, a lot of images you see, maybe she's wearing a crucifix around her neck. So she still, throughout her life, very much identified with, I think, some of, the iconography, the stories, certainly had, I think, some of the guilt that carried with her through her life. But she was also extremely spiritual, and she also felt a sort of resentment at Catholicism for sort of putting that fear in her. And what I think Mother wanted was more freedom and less fear. That's what she was going for, I think, all the time. As an artist, but also she wanted to communicate this message to the world that there is nothing to be afraid of. So, I at least my brother might speak to this too, because he has a different experience of her relationship with Catholicism, but ultimately she had still a lot of friends who were very much a part of a religious community. She went to visit the nuns at the monastery. She had relationships with Catholic and Protestants, pastors and clergy alike. So I think they really respected her for her reverence for life, for her appreciation for the human condition, certainly for the work she did as a philanthropist. But she really did resent this fear of God, where you had to act appropriate, you had to be a certain way to be acceptable. And she really hated that. Yet she also loved the Catholic idea, the reverence for God, which I think also is some of the motivation for her more spiritual work, is she did have a reverence for God and Jesus and things like that. So it's complicated, I think is what I'm trying to say.
All right, and then one last question. Is the gallery sanctuary, the art exhibit, is that still open? And I just wonder, with all the art of your mother's that you've seen, do you have a favorite?
So since Nancy passed, Michael and I were in a tough position because we did not expect to have to deal with as much as we had to deal with as soon as we had to deal with it. And so, untangling her estate was a long process and an emotionally difficult one. But we had to sell the sanctuary because, without her there, it's not the same. And but we still have a lot of original art, some of which we're not at all selling, but some of it's been in museum exhibitions, some of it is for sale. And then her prints and printed work, we're still keeping that business going, so people can still buy her prints on the website, in all different kinds of formats. And we even sold some merchandise, we had some t-shirts and stuff like that. But people are still able to get the work, buy the work, put it on their walls, and certainly her collectors are still out there. You saw some of them who collect the original artwork. As far as my favorites, it's tough. I really connect with the African work a lot. I think just the fact that it came from these adventures, part of which I got to experience, was really exciting for me. And I think those I find really exciting and moving. And then her later work, which was, the more dramatic pieces, some with the skeletons, they were really, it was like Sitting Bull, which were really colorful, the story she painted that in the dark. So very daring works, where they're just all instinct. She's not thinking at all, she's just going at that canvas in a very kind of fluid way. Those are some of my favorite pieces as well. And those are huge pieces. So if you go to one of our shows where we're having an exhibition, you can stand in front of those pieces, and they're, some of them are 8, 9 feet tall, and you just get to see the scope of her talent, because not only could she do what she did, but she could do it on these massive canvases. Where she was on a ladder, she's painting, she's throwing things on the floor. So she was a bit of a performance artist in that way later, because just watching her paint was so performative. So that stuff also really appeals to me.
And I know we've probably got a few questions from the audience before we have to leave, but your work is just incredible, Alex. I just have enjoyed this documentary so much, and Well, wait a minute, you just made, you said some of your favorites was your trip to Africa, your yard work from Africa, and the statement in the film said that you went out of school for 2 weeks, you'd learn more on the trip.
Yeah.
Did you learn more from the trip?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
do we have a couple of questions from the audience before we need to vacate and get everybody to the next question? Yes, right up here.
Hi, you grew up in a really magic place. When did you realize it?
He said, I grew up in a very magical place. When did I realize it? It's my son. You know, way too late. I think we took it for granted. My brother and I took it for granted, I think. We knew it was different. We knew it was unique. But it wasn't probably till we were, teenagers, I would say, that we were like, oh wow, we live in kind of this, paradise. Yeah, it was later in life, and even sometimes I think it was, I don't know, it was like, it was a bit of a heavy burden. There was a lot of work to do, there was, animals were always escaping, it was like we were having to chase them down. Certainly we had to put a lot of animals in the ground, there's anytime you have something that wonderful, you also have a responsibility with it. And my brother and my father, of course, contributed so much to that place we grew up. It is a lot of work. Mom wanted that. She was her joy to get up and tend to that 40 acres and everything that was living. But and I think when we had to sell that property, it was like mourning my mother all over again. It was extremely difficult for us. So yeah, it's magic. I don't know if you could ever recreate that, and it's just one of those things we were lucky enough to experience. Yeah.
Do we have another question? Yeah, right over here.
That's it.
So one of the strongest, most powerful parts of the movie for me was getting to hear Nancy talking about her own life in that audio. So I'm curious, where did that come from? Is that one interview? Is that multiple interviews? Is it only audio, or was there video that went with it? And what was it like combing through that and putting her voice in the film about her life?
So I had done multiple interviews with my mother over the course of her life. However, what you hear when she speaks is probably 97% from one interview I did with her a couple months before she passed. And she was sick with cancer, and most days her voice was not strong enough. There was a couple days there where she had more energy and her voice was strong enough, and I got out the recorder and did a very intimate interview with her, which probably lasted 3.5 to 4 hours. And that is what you're hearing, is her talk. It's really the last interview with her that she'd ever done, and probably the last time she was able to speak coherently. So really it is the final words from Nancy in her life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we have one more?
Hi, is your mother's work studied at universities anywhere? Are you learning classes in art history?
Yeah, she's asking if my mother's work is studied. So at universities, I don't know. There could be some universities around, central Indiana, where she's very popular, which, bring in some Nancy Wells as an example. But I do know that she's considered one of the famous Hoosiers in Indiana. So a lot of kids, like the one young lady who was inspired by her, to paint, a lot of kids go and they do a report about Nancy. They'll go do the research, dress like her or whatever, paint something, and do a report. So the younger children do know Nancy still as a famous Hoosier, like, an astronaut or an actor or something from Indiana. And that's one of the reasons I made, we made this film, is because we want to keep that legacy alive and her, inspiring sort of status as a famous artist in Indiana for children. As far as, universities, I don't know. You know, the art world is such a weird thing. It's such a strange space. You know, modern art and contemporary art or whatever. My mother was sort of existed outside of that to a degree. She was not interested in sort of the academics of art, and it's not that she like pushed it away, but she was very much about connecting with just, you know, regular people. A lot of people who were completely unsophisticated about art were her collectors. And I think that was important to her because their relationship with the work was purely emotional. Even though my mother was applying, you know, all the things she'd learned as an artist, you know, color, composition, you know, all the technique that she'd learned, she was applying that, and she was sophisticated about the way she painted. But she didn't want to put a barrier up that you had to be sophisticated to get her art, if that makes sense. But I'd love her to be studied, you know, wherever she could be studied, but it's not something that we really, it's on our radar, honestly.
Alex, thank you, and thank you for all your team being here. It's great. I'm sure you have new projects coming up already. You probably have new stuff already in the makings, right?
We do. We're working on some other things.
Well, make sure you bring it back to Palm Springs.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.